Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Very welcome to the first session of today. We have a policy session now with the central question: how can policies support the deployment of sustainable bioenergy towards its most effective uses? So I am Dina Bachowski. I'm chair of the IEA Bioenergy, who is a co-organizer of this conference. I will be moderating this panel discussion today, together with my colleague Mark Brown, who is vice chair of IEA Bioenergy. We have 4 distinguished panelists here up on the podium. We have Marlon Arraiz, who is director of the Biofuels Department at the Ministry of Mines and Energy in Brazil. We have Paul Bennett, who is Integrated Bioenergy Portfolio Leader at Sion, New Zealand. We have Daniela Tren, Division Manager, Bioenergy and Bioenergy Systems at the Helmholtz Center of Environmental Research in Germany. And we have Christian Rakosch, who is President at the World Bioenergy Association, and he's based in Austria. So the question of this session actually is a twofold question, because the first question is what is the role of bioenergy in the energy system and how can policies support the deployment? And the second part of the question is, so biomass is a limited resource. Do policies probably need to prioritize one use over the other? We are very happy that we will have a recorded introductory statement directly from IEA. Jeremy Moorhouse, who is responsible for biofuels at the International Energy Agency in Paris, has recorded some background presentation for us to understand the role of bioenergy. We know that we need to have policies to get the deployment of bioenergy, because we need to make up for a potential price premium that we have, or we need to create a market demand for bioenergy so that bioenergy deployment can take place. So I think we are ready now to have the recorded presentation of Jeremy Moorhouse.
IEA headquarters here in Paris. Thank you very much to the organizers for allowing me to make this presentation virtually, and to all of you for your patience over the next 10 minutes or so as I walk through the IEA's perspective on bioenergy's role in the energy transition. Just last week, we came out with an update to the World Energy Outlook, with an update to the net zero scenario, as well as where we're at with existing policies that are in place and announced policies. Now, for those that are familiar with the IEA's work in this area, we have a very similar message this year for the role of bioenergy in the energy transition, and it is that modern bioenergy is one of the pillars of the energy transition. It increases to 20% of total energy supply in 2050, up from 7% today, and that's more than double total use today. Now, this has been the same case or conclusion for a number of years in the World Energy Outlook. Despite changes in technology prices and different contexts and policies that have been put in place around the world, because bioenergy offers a number of key advantages. So even if there are these changes, it still continues to play this role. It's accessible. It provides a secure source of energy for a number of different countries around the world. And it's affordable for those that are using this source of energy. It's also compatible broadly with a wide range of different technologies already in place around the world. Now, when considering this level of growth, more than a doubling in the production of bioenergy, we need to consider the sustainability limits of that supply. Now, from our perspective, there are enough sustainable biomass supplies within sustainable guardrails. And in the net zero scenario, we put very strict limits on no overall increase in cropland use for bioenergy production and no encroachment onto forested land from current levels. There's other sustainability considerations in the report, greenhouse gas emissions, of course, and also air emissions and affordability. But on the land use line, we have these very strict guidelines. In this scenario, the total production of bioenergy reaches 100 exajoules by 2050, which is also at the lower end of scenarios that have been assessed on the sustainable supply limits of biomass. So for these reasons, we view, at least from our perspective, there are enough sustainable supplies available to allow for this amount of growth of bioenergy production and use if policies are designed and implemented to ensure those guardrails are in place. Now, bioenergy has an essential role to play across a number of sectors. There's a limited supply, and so we're careful with where those uses happen across the economy. And the transport sector is one of those critical areas. Liquid biofuels more than double to 2035 in the net zero scenario, which is quite a significant increase above what we're seeing under the existing policy settings around the world. Now, it plays a very important role in the aviation and maritime sector, especially as we move towards, past 2030 into 2035. Most of that growth is going to the aviation and maritime sectors, although there's still quite a bit in the road sector as well. Now here, I'm including some of the other solutions to reducing emissions in the transport sector, because bioenergy shouldn't be considered in isolation of these other areas. And there's two big reasons for that I think link to the policy conversation that's happening afterwards. Number one, we want to think of where is bioenergy the most useful? Where does it offer a unique advantage over other options? And for liquid biofuels, the existing transportation fleet, aviation and maritime fuels is one of those very special areas where bioenergy can play a role. The other reason to look at the combination of solutions is from a policy perspective. In some areas, bioenergy may play a clear role. In others, it's in competition with other solutions like renewable hydrogen, hydrogen-based fuels, and electricity as well. In there, performance-based policies that drive the lowest cost solution can be a very effective approach for driving new GHG reductions. Now, the industry sector is another big growth area for bioenergy, definitely in industries that already have bioenergy supplies close by. These could be agriculture, sugarcane, collection and processing, as well as for high temperature heat in some sectors. We're starting to see growth there as well. And in the net zero scenario, you'll see a bit quicker growth than what we're seeing under existing policy situations. Now, as with transportation, there's the same dynamic where in some areas, other solutions, electricity for low temperature heat, are starting to dominate, but there's other places where there's a competition between different solution options. So that same policy consideration on the industry side. And I'll finish with electricity generation is another key sector. Here, bioenergy plays a role of complementing variable renewable energy sources. And when combined with carbon capture and storage, it offers a way to reduce emissions even further to help offset those areas of the economy that are still emitting. So these three, transport, industry, and electricity generation, are critical areas where bioenergy has a unique role to play, but there is some competition with other sources. Now, of course, looking at global numbers does not paint the picture of what's happening in different regions. Right now, they're around 7% of bioenergy use in total energy production. But in Latin America, that number's closer to 30%. And Latin America also accounts for near 20% of global bioenergy production around the world. And Brazil is one of those key powerhouses that drives a lot of that growth. If we look in our scenarios out to 2035 and 2050, there's very strong growth for liquid biofuels. Again, this is in the road sector, but as we move into 2035, a lot of growth for aviation and maritime fuels as well. And not just for domestic use, but also starting to look for exports. And also a lot of demand for solid bioenergy and biogases. Combined, this brings the share of bioenergy in Latin America well above what we're seeing globally right now, and even what we see in 2050 globally, to near above 30%, getting close to 40% in some of the scenarios over some of the time periods. Now, some of this growth that we're seeing in the APS, which is the announced policy scenario, is driven by the Fuel of the Future bill in Brazil, and I want to draw attention to that because it's the type of policy package that we like to see that drives growth across different sectors. It's comprehensive. It looks at transportation. It looks at aviation. And it also lays the framework for carbon capture and storage. So that type of policy drives the scale of growth in Brazil that we also need to see in other parts of the world. Now, across the scenarios I've shared, we're never on track with the net zero pathway. There's a lot of different actions that are needed to accelerate production and use of bioenergy, but I'll draw your attention to just 4 of them. The first one is a clear and global ambition related to bioenergy, or this could be expanded more broadly into sustainable fuels, as Brazil has taken a look at in the G20 this year. The renewable electricity sector, energy efficiency, methane reductions all have these clear global ambitions, and something like that is missing for bioenergy or sustainable fuels more broadly. The second point is to implement and expand demand and supply side policies. These are absolutely essential to drive investment, to build new production facilities, and to drive demand for biofuels and bioenergy more broadly. This is especially needed in the aviation and maritime sectors. We're just starting to see those policies being implemented in a few countries around the world, but to get on that net zero pathway, that needs to happen much more broadly. And of course, what is sustainability? What does that mean for these fuels? We also need to seek consensus on performance-based sustainability requirements, and I'll share a slide from a report we did with the G20 this year as to what that can look like. And of course, this extends beyond greenhouse gas emissions to social considerations, other environmental considerations, and financial considerations as well. And fourth, we need to accelerate technology deployment. All of the net zero pathways that I've shared depend on the broad commercialization and deployment of emerging technologies around the world, not just for processing, but also agricultural techniques to help reduce emissions from agriculture, and planting practices that don't compete for land use for food and feed production. So I'll leave you with this final slide, which is our contribution on an approach for seeking consensus on performance-based sustainability requirements. This is especially important when we're thinking of fuels that are traded around the world, so that those investing in the fuel and those purchasing or selling it have a shared agreement of what sustainability means. And this is a proposal for a common GHG intensity labeling program. Another feature when looking at this slide is you'll see that every single pathway can get to almost zero emissions. So this performance-based approach to drive to lower emissions is incredibly important to make the most of the different fuels that are available. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you all the best in the conversations to come immediately after this and in the rest of the day. Thank you very much.
So that's obviously a great start to the conversation, and I'll now pass to our first panel member, Marlon, who will summarize some of the G20 discussions around bioenergy, biofuels.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you, Dina, for hosting this session and moderating such great panelists with us here at our conference. And well, after what Jeremy said, it is easy to talk a little bit about the role of sustainable fuels, mostly in the transport decarbonization. I think that we need to say just a few words, some quick reminders to think about what the context of energy transition in transport, what does this mean? Because we believe that the main legacy that we have from G20 Energy Transition Working Group and the Declaration of Ministers is regarding what we have for sustainable fuels. So we must remember that we have today a population of 2 billion internal combustion engines. So we cannot get rid of it from day to night. We need to think about what we have in terms of liquid fuels demand and what we can do and what we must do in order to decarbonize this very important element that we have in terms of climate change issues from this sector. And when we think that we have a significant part of the population that does not have access to energy, these things get complicated, because we know that we may have more demand and more energy demand and more energy requirements and more internal combustion engines running, and we need that to provide access to goods and to services. And when we think that we need to address this question, we may think that we will have an even bigger problem, an even bigger challenge. Energy investments. When we think about energy investments, International Energy Agency put in its investment outlook that 5 years ago, back in 2018, which is for energy purposes and for energy sector yesterday, we had the same amount of investments put on oil industry and the same amount of investments, $1 trillion, for renewable energy yesterday in 2018. When we consider the numbers for 2023, we see that we have a substantial growth of investments in renewable energy, and when we think about 2024, we have the scene set to 3 trillions for the first time in 2024, with 2 trillions going to clean energy technologies and $1 trillion going for investments in oil technologies in the energy sector. So this is very good, because we know that we have now more money going for clean energy solutions and clean energy investments. And the drivers for these renewable energy investments are public policies, of course, the costs of this renewable energy, that is this type of energy is getting cheaper and more competitive, and also the industry practices that set room for demands for cleaner energy and cleaner sources of energy. So we may think that this is something that is going okay, but not when we remember that the amount of those huge investments that are going to clean energy types of energy, it is just a fraction that is directed for sustainable and clean fuels. So we have a huge challenge to address, and that when it comes for our task in G20, sometimes we see from what Jeremy told us in his presentation and from what we've seen, that we have to think about those sustainable fuels as a real source, as a real way for addressing those questions regarding the decarbonization, especially for transport and industry. And we have these challenges to address this. And when we think that we need to triple the amount of sustainable fuels that we use today, we see that carbon accounting for sustainable fuels and sustainability criteria and the sustainability discussion, as Jeremy pointed, is key for this. And we had to set the room for this to happen. And I think that G20, the work that has been done, especially with Itamaraty help, with Lais is here, I think she's going to tell a little bit more in the next panel. We had a huge and a great outcome from the ministerial declaration of ministers of energy in the G20. So for the first time, we now are talking about sustainable fuels, technology neutrality, and also admitting that sustainable fuels are necessary and key for this discussion. So this is the message. We have to go from here. We have to take advantage of this declaration. We need to think about it as something that we have now as a reference for policymakers and especially in the energy sector to go from here and then establish the new way with new policies that we are going to discuss here. So this is my introductory message for us to discuss, and well, let's see what we can contribute in this BBES conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marlon. So let's now make a big leap from Brazil to New Zealand. I want to ask Paul Bennett to provide some introductory statement about how New Zealand is doing towards bioenergy. What policy do you have there? Do you steer biomass use? What are barriers, challenges? Please.
Thank you very much, Dina. Thank you, organisers, for inviting me here to participate in this panel. Hopefully it'll be a great discussion. And bon dia, good morning, or as we say in New Zealand, morena. I'd like to... my slides aren't up, are they? No? No slides? That's okay, I'll just talk. I'd like to just give you a little bit of an overview to New Zealand. Big leap from a country the size of Brazil to New Zealand. It's not a small country as everyone thinks. We're bigger than the UK. We're about 25% bigger in landmass than the United Kingdom, for instance. So it's not small, but we've only got 5 million people, so population density is really small. We do not have an oil refinery anymore. We closed that 3 years ago, but we do produce oil and gas, and we've got 250 years of coal. So in a really pretty good shape in terms of energy. We have recently over the last 4 years, stopped gas exploration and oil exploration off New Zealand. That means our gas production now is 40% lower than it was 4 years ago. Means gas prices have rocketed. They're 3.5 times higher than they used to be. Electricity prices based off gas has gone up as well. So we're facing a little bit of an energy crisis in terms of cost. In terms of New Zealand's economy, we are a very land-focused, export-focused economy. A lot of our produce is, the likes of red meat, lamb, beef, milk, timber, all exported out of New Zealand. So really focused on export. In fact, we think about 45% of New Zealand's GDP is reliant upon shipping. So that puts that into perspective a little bit. As I said, we're a land-focused economy. We have a lot of land, given the size of the population. We have about 30% of our country is a native forest. 8% is plantation forestry, so those are trees specifically planted on a 25 to 30-year rotation for timber and then other resources, pulp logs, other fibre. We only have about 2% of our land as arable land because it's quite a hilly, rolling country. So to only 2%, we can't look at corn, we can't look at oil seeds for bioenergy purposes. So our bioenergy will really be focused on timber or residues. In terms of energy and the energy position in New Zealand, 45% of our total energy supply is renewable. We have a lot of geothermal. Geothermal is used for process heat and for power generation. We have a lot of hydro. And so if you look at power generation across New Zealand, we're about 84% renewable. We do use about 6% of our total energy is bioenergy. And that is predominantly used, the residues in sawmills and the wastes in pulp and paper mills used for energy within those systems. But we are now starting to see more wood or wood-derived products being used for heat across New Zealand. In terms of the policy settings, we have we've introduced policy to phase out coal. There will be no new coal boilers in New Zealand, and by 2037 we will have phased out coal totally from process heat in New Zealand. We do not have policies for liquid biofuels, and we do not have policies for biogas use. We're seeing other policies for other reasons promoting those areas. So, for instance, the biogas area, we are seeing biogas being deployed across New Zealand, but that's largely because of those increasing costs for natural gas because of the ban on exploration, and from a waste minimisation perspective, so avoiding landfilling. On liquid fuels, we were looking at developing a policy for implementation of liquid fuels in the domestic transport sector. That was withdrawn because of costs, but we're now seeing a lot of interest in those international fuels, so aviation and marine, really because of New Zealand's export focus. So we are very light in terms of policy, only really focus policy around coal phase out, and a pretty strong emission trading system, which is promoting some of the other decarbonisation activities in New Zealand, and then that international view that is promoting SAF production and marine biofuels. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. So we're going to jump the globe again from New Zealand to Europe and Germany with Daniela, who will give us a bit of overview on bioenergy and the bioeconomy and some of the balancing act there.
Yeah, thank you very much. Also from my side to take part of the panel here. Europe, we heard already some about yesterday. Who was able to, or who was here and listened to Maria Georgiado? Okay, thank you. So you are well informed, and I can now step beyond the bioenergy in Europe and go to the question, how can we combine bioenergy with sustainable bioeconomy strategies? And sustainable bioeconomy is another big issue. We also heard it yesterday. Also very well considered from Brazil under the G20 initiative, but there are more than 60 countries worldwide having a clear and dedicated bioeconomy strategy. There's Europe in between, the US, also Brazil, but many more. And those strategies have in common that they combine different regulations, governance, support schemes, communications, to increase the share and innovate the share of biomass in several sectors. Of course, there's different understanding of bioeconomy, but maybe it's worth to mention that today in Kenya we have the third Global Bioeconomy Summit. So it's a kind of competition with our conference here. And also there's a debate is how to accelerate bioeconomy. This means all these strategies come along with increasing demand for biomass beyond energy. For example, in housing, especially wood construction is a big issue also with regard to carbon capture, with regard to chemical industry, to plastics, and many more. And it is a very easy calculation, and don't worry, I don't go into details here. These are the global biomass floors shown in petajoule, and this is an easy calculation that you see the global overall yield and the overall demand of fossil do not fit. So it is clear that this sustainable bioeconomy needs two things. One thing is that it's really important to have other renewable sources such as wind and solar very much increased. We also have seen these pictures from IEA some minutes before, and that we think how to use the biomass smart. And to go in this direction, there's this, let's say, more longer term concept of a circular bioeconomy. And this circular bioeconomy means, yes, we use, I don't know, okay, you can see it. So we use sustainable biomass sourcing and then start with a kind of material production, use these materials as long as possible, repair them, recycle them, and only have, let's say, certain energy streams. And there are two relevant energy streams. One is on integrated multi-output production systems, and these are the biorefineries, which are typically or should be a very good combination of materials, chemicals, bioenergy, and biofuels. And the second outlet, in a way, is for residues and waste, which are not possible to circulate, and then to use them for different options for energy. And this concept is proposed in many bioeconomy strategies, and it is and it has maybe a bit the how can you say it, the challenge that if you implement this is not only about energy policy. You have to go from agriculture via energy policy to waste policy, and it is also not a one-fits-all solution. So different regional cluster come up maybe with their different sustainable circular bioeconomy strategies. And we see several options there to have the bioenergy as a byproduct, and it's not only a byproduct, it's also an enabler to make those production systems feasible. So just to summarize, if we think about deployment of sustainable bioenergy towards more efficient uses, then we can expect that the demand for biomass will increase in many sectors, not only in the energy sector. If we go for the more circular way, we can really realize more with the same. So this is really an increase of value. Two ways to very well integrate bioenergy as byproducts from, and also as waste and residues utilization. And even in Europe, where we look a lot for waste and residue utilization, we still have unlocked potentials there, so they are really good options. And finally, if we think forward and apply this bioenergy as a carbon-containing energy carrier, we could really focus on gaps in the energy system. I did not go into this so much because I think the IEA presentation gave a very good overview there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela. So now we come to the fourth introductory statement, and I would like to ask Christian Rakosch of the World Bioenergy Association, coming from industry perspective, probably, what is your take on where biomass should be used and what policy can do? Please.
Thank you very much. I would like to come back to the question of the most effective use and just try to reflect on what means most effective. Is it the most efficient one in technical terms? Is it the greatest GHG mitigation potential? Or is it about essential services? And if you recall, this concept of essential services became really important during the pandemic, when we suddenly found out, oh shit, there are some things we cannot live without easily. And I think it's worthwhile, if we think into the distant future, to consider also bioenergy from the point of view of where will we really need it. And in the pandemic, flying was not the most important need that we had. And in fact, it was possible to live without it for 2 years without any consequences. So that's the question I would like to address. And from that perspective, maybe policy focus could change into looking at what do we really need in a situation where the energy transition comes in at such a cost that essential services cannot be provided or used. Take, for example, a subject that is even quite current, which is the ability of people to heat their homes in Europe, which was seriously undermined by the skyrocketing gas prices, and people were not able to live in warm homes anymore. So that's what we call energy poverty. So that is something I think we should keep in mind, that there are some really fundamental needs that should be prioritized from a human perspective, not from a technical perspective. And one of them I want to address right now, and that is the need for cooked food. The need for cooked food is probably the most essential need. Right now there are 2 billion people that are providing this need for cooked food with traditional biomass use, firewood, cooking on open fires. And that is where 40% of the global bioenergy use goes to, and where this use is not sustainable. For various reasons, for overuse of resources in Africa, massive deforestation due to charcoal production and firewood production, where you have very serious health impacts with, I think, more people dying from diseases that are related to inhaling smoke than during the pandemic every year. So it's a very serious issue. And that issue can be addressed by modern bioenergy. With a gasifying cook stove, you can do that, but you need upgraded biofuels. You need pellets, you need chips that are dry to do that. And it would be a way of providing that service in an affordable way. Because what is now being promoted most is switching to LPG, but out of the 2 billion people, maybe 1.8 billion cannot afford LPG, and by the way, it's not sustainable. It's going back to the fossil, to a fossil solution. So how could policy change this essential need of a significant part of the global population? Fundamentally by creating economic incentives. For example, by purchasing carbon credits as states in so-called internationally traded mitigation options, ITMOs. That's right now pretty high up in the discussion, will be also on the agenda of the Conference of Parties. So that would be a way to really create a demand for carbon credits that could fund the transition to a sustainable bioenergy use. Or by, for example, opening carbon markets like the European trading system to verified carbon mitigation activities in third world countries. So this is one possibility how policies could address essential needs and kind of transition unsustainable bioenergy use to sustainable bioenergy use. That's my statement. Thank you.
So some really great introductions from our panelists. We'll now kind of shift into an open question part of the panel here, and we'll start the panel off with the question of what should be the focus of policy to support the deployment of sustainable bioenergy to fit IEA's net zero roadmap. What do we think is missing at the moment? And we might start with Marlo and work our way down.
Well, thank you, Mark, for the question. I think that from the public policies perspective, we need to be very creative in order to address and considering the local reality in order to produce the energy and the solutions for bioenergy and biofuels that we may have for this challenge of climate change and the contribution that we may have from public policies. They are essential in this process, and I think that we have some quite good examples here in Brazil. And I brought the question about what we have in terms of the fleet of internal combustion engines that will continue to demand liquid fuels. And the contribution that we can have from bioenergy and biofuels comes from what we have done in terms of public policies. So we don't have the condition and budget to subsidize different forms of solutions in this term. So we have to be more creative. We have to deal with technology neutrality and also mandates. That's the way that we can think of a public policy that will drive some solutions for providing the production of bioenergy and biofuels that we may have in the future. So considering this perspective, when we see what we have done in terms of biofuels, especially with ethanol and biodiesel, from this more than 4 decades of ethanol usage, using ethanol as a pure fuel for nowadays flex fuel cars, and also the ethanol that is blended in gasoline, we managed to save almost 2.5 billion barrels of oil in terms of energy. And this is a very significant contribution in terms of what we had in our fuel mix. When we consider biodiesel, we had the same more recent contribution. So we always did it by mandates, by having policies that will set what the fuel mix could be and should be in the future. The other second pillar of these policies came with RenovaBio, the perspective of measuring carbon intensity and setting targets for carbon intensity in our fuel mix. So the idea is to have a policy that is transparent. We have a mechanism of public consultancy each year for RenovaBio for setting its targets, and with an open modeling for this policy, we open to public consultancy every year, and society can contribute and to see if that is suitable for the economy, for the perspective of offer in terms of raw materials and the production and the fuel market. So this is another dimension of public policy that must be considered: the transparency and the public consultancy and the use of the best science available in order to measure in a very direct and a very objective way what we have in terms of carbon intensity and what we need to have in terms of targets to do it in a very sustainable way, in considering all aspects of sustainability, including the economics and the social aspects of it. And the fourth and the third aspect of public policy is what we achieved in terms of policy with the Fuel of the Future program. It's completing the options of we can have here in Brazil, but also this applies to each country in the world that can produce bioenergy, but to see what you have in terms of potential and vocation, and to use it and to put it as a target in a mandate for increasing and displacing the fossil fuels that you have nowadays. So combining all these types of public policies, I think that we can have very good results. And we must take from what Jeremy said, we need to triple this amount of bioenergy in terms of production of sustainable fuels and the bioenergy availability. And we can do that, and this can be done sustainably, and we have the possibility to do it, not expanding and not invading any native land areas in the world. So that is the message, and that is the perspective of public policies that we can think of. Thank you.
Just before you pass the mic, I really like the concept that Jeremy presented of performance-based policy, so building your policy around a desired outcome. How do you see that concept connecting with those three policy settings you just mentioned?
Oh, I'm sorry.
So the concept of performance-based policy settings. So having,
oh yeah.
So could you maybe just
indeed.
connect to that with those three levels you just mentioned?
Well, I think that what we've seen from Renova Bio, for instance, is that we can address those questions. We can put a life cycle analysis in place. So we did it in a very short time period. We have the launch and the sanction of the law, Renova Bio's law, back in 2017. In 2020, all the instruments were in place. And I think that is pretty feasible. I think that's an example that we can do that that approach in terms of public policies in a very short time. So this is what we take from that.
Thank you. We'll pass the microphone to Christian.
Yes, regarding the focus of policies, in my intervention, I just mentioned the needs of households, which is heating, room heating, cooking, but of course other essential services is industrial heat. We need industrial production. I mean, just think about the food industry. It's absolutely essential, and many of these industrial services are needing heat. And I don't quite agree with the analysis of the IEA that this industrial heat will be provided by electricity, simply because that is a very expensive option. Electricity cost is at least 3 times as expensive as producing heat with electricity is 3 times as expensive as with directly combusting biomass, simply because of the efficiency in between and the transmission and all that this stuff. So I think that is also something that needs to be accounted for, and we're so enthusiastic about transforming biomass into higher value fuels. But every transformation is leading to significant losses also. A part of this view on the essential importance of industrial production, I also see in this area the greatest efficiency possibilities, because there where you use biomass directly as source of heat, you're achieving something like 90% conversion efficiency. Whereas if you go the route through electricity production with biomass, you lose at least 60% of all the energy that is in the biomass, in the transformation process. And in the transmission, it's another 10%. So it's 70% that is lost. So I think minimizing transformation losses will be also an aspect that we'll need to take into account in a sustainable future energy policy.
Thank you, Christian. Paul?
Just following on from the last comment, that's exactly where New Zealand is putting its biomass into the process heat sector. We're seeing a lot of conversion of process heat plants start from coal to wood-derived products, whether it's wood chip, dry chip, wet chip, white pellets, black pellets. So that's all starting to happen in New Zealand, which is really, really positive. But I would just also reflect on Marlon's comments, and clearly, Brazil have a very, very well thought out strategy around energy, around bioenergy. New Zealand's at the other end of the spectrum. We don't have an energy strategy for the country at the moment. It's being developed, but you would argue that's very, very late. We should have one by now, which has meant that we've been really trying to pick winners without having the full information. And so the country's been investing in hydrogen, it's been investing in electrifying everything it can, without thinking through the consequences of that. And bioenergy has really been forgotten to some extent. If we look at the electricity situation, if we electrify the light-duty fleet, we put in electric heat pumps for low-temperature heat. That's going to require a doubling of our generating capacity in New Zealand. We're already at 84% renewable in our power generation system, which will mean we're going to have to put in more and more hydro schemes. We're going to have to flood more valleys. There's an environmental consequence to all that sort of stuff, and that's really not being considered. And as I said, bioenergy has been to some extent forgotten. Part of the reason for me, I've been in New Zealand 10 years. I'm actually from the UK. Part of the reason for me moving to New Zealand was the potential that bioenergy has there. If you look at the amount of biomass we've got available, the residues from the harvesting processes, the low-grade logs that we export for single use in countries around the world, and actually the amount of underutilized land we have that could be planted up with other feedstock options, you can very easily get to a point where we could cover most of our energy demand using biomass. But it's just been forgotten in New Zealand. And we need to start thinking about the energy system and how we best use the biomass we've got and think about mobilization of that biomass.
Thanks, Paul. And I would probably echo for Australia, our policy around bioenergy feels very reactive or responsive to opportunities without a well-thought-through strategy. Just before you pass the mic, you mentioned in your opening comment that there's a few policies coming through New Zealand that are targeted at waste management and other things other than energy that have driven bioenergy as an outcome. Do you see that as an unintended consequence, or is that possibly some another avenue that New Zealand could be promoting the concept?
No, I think it was an unintended consequence of like biogas piece was really around waste minimization and avoiding landfilling of waste, and so it's just been an unforeseen consequence of those policies. And as I said, that's also been promoted by the ban on natural gas exploration.
And can we learn from that unintended consequence? Is there policy settings that we could develop on that learning?
I think we should. I think we need to realise there are some direct policies that we can put in place, but there are benefits that other policies that aren't actually directed toward bioenergy will have benefits, and we need to sort of work with them and build off of them.
And I guess that comes back to that performance-based policy, is that you're driving an outcome that's important in the policy settings that's not related to energy, but it drives bioenergy to an area where it has real strength to respond to that societal expectation or demand.
I think that's right. So we can work with that, but I think we need to really get on top of the reasons why bioenergy is almost a forgotten energy vector.
Thanks, Paul. Danielle?
Yeah, thank you. I would like to add 3 points to the question where policies could maybe be strengthened. First is, I see it's really important to have bioenergy in combination and together with bioeconomy policies and not against or parallel, because this really could better also leverage the potentials in the bio refinery fields. And here I see, of course, residues and waste use as a no-regret option, so where we can really go forward, and also the co-generation aspects. And I think this is not, let's put it like this, not in all European countries, at least very well established. The second point is that I see really strengths when combining bioenergy with other renewables. Just give you an example here. We have, for example, in Germany, so-called virtual renewable power plants, where wind, photovoltaics, and biogas are combined and automatically controlled so that they can, let's say, behave like a real power plant in the market. And this is just one example. There are these hybrid systems of heat pumps together with pellet boilers, etc. So in many options here there are additional chances. And the third point, and I think this is maybe the most difficult, is from my point of view, in many regions, again, at least in Europe, there is a rumor on the resource base. And we see this actually, especially in forests, and how can forests contribute best. And I think that bringing those clarification, as we have nicely seen them in the SAF sector, or what is a sustainable biofuel, more also in the direction, what is a sustainable resource, could also really help to accelerate and make also bioenergy, let's say, less controversial. And maybe just to add also to the question on the performance-based policies, I think this is really a way where those different aspects could be brought together. But for me, it's also really a bit the question, what kind of performance indicators are the right ones? And we have discussed on greenhouse gases, we have heard from efficiency. Maybe just to bring a third aspect in these discussions is about the robustness. Yeah, so that we can really expect that those pathways have a clear perspective.
Now, on the concept of integrating with bioeconomy, in the Australian context, we're starting to see the concept extend into land management as you start to have opportunities to monetize things like biodiversity, carbon, and such. So land management, and if I take the example in Australia of native forests, where they're now managing them for fire risk mitigation so that they can protect the biodiversity and the carbon value, there's an output of biomass from that. So how do you see that fitting into the model that you've described of a production of bioproducts as opposed to the land management strategy fitting into that bioeconomy?
Thank you, Mark, for this very important point. I think there's really a strong interlinkage. And I mean, this is in two directions. One direction is the question, how can we more or less use the land in the best way to provide feedstock? But I also see this other point you made. So, for example, land which is, degraded by fires, or which need some restoration. What contribution can come from biomass grown there for biorefineries, for bioenergy?
Thank you. Dina, do you want to?
Thank you. Yeah, so I think we've already discussed a lot about also not only what the policies could do to support the deployment, but also what is an efficient use of biomass. So I'm going to just go a second round of very brief statements and then start with Daniela. But first, also to give a heads up to the audience, if we manage to get brief statements here, you would also have the opportunity to raise your own questions, so you think about them, and it won't be like 10 questions that we can take, but 2 or 3. So I would like to take advantage of this global spread that we have sitting here, We have seen nicely from Daniela's presentation that there is a need to prioritize the use of biomass to certain uses because we simply don't have sufficient to cover everything. And my take is that actually there cannot be like one answer to this solution because the circumstances in different countries are very different. So the most apparent probably being between OECD and non-OECD countries, whether the economy is growing very strongly or not. And I would like to hear from you, starting with Daniela and going back down again. What is your take on probably regionality, or which aspect should a country or a policymaker take into account to prioritize certain biomass uses? Daniela, please.
Yeah, thank you, Dina, for this question. And I may bring two aspects here into the discussion. One is, I think, of course, it's regional specific, but it's also in a way, let's say, time specific where you stand in this energy transition. And just giving you one example, so we see this, again, strong increasing wind and solar electricity provision, which is quite very good to reduce greenhouse gases, but it comes along with additional investment needs for making sure that there's flexibility to, let's say, close the gaps when the wind is not blowing and the sun is not shining. And those flexibility is really comparable, easy to provide with bioenergy, with existing, already existing installation. And so I think for countries with high shares of variable renewables and low shares of water, hydropower, I have to add this could be really an interesting case, and this is true for quite very different countries. Yeah, it's not depending for certain countries. So this is the first point. It's not only about regions, it's also about timeline of transformation. And my second point is what I would raise here is who should prioritize. I mean, what we, and maybe here the European perspective comes a bit into my argument here. We see on one hand side it's really important to include industry, because they have really to do a lot of this transformation in the end. But for all bioenergy, and it's not only bioenergy, it's also other renewables, you need acceptance. And so the question is, if you go for prioritizations, you should make sure, or this is at least the understanding in Germany, to have people in this prioritization. And just to clarify, this does not mean everybody can just give his idea, but just, for example, one finding we had is that we have much higher acceptance for bioenergy plants if they are just smaller. And we all know this is not perfect with regard to scaling, to economies of scale, but if you can really significantly improve acceptance and accelerate implementations, etc., these aspects should not be forgotten if we talk about prioritization.
Thanks a lot, Daniela. So you hand over to Paul the microphone. Let's see what your take is.
Well, I might not answer your questions directly, but for me, the important things for a country like New Zealand is learn. We really must learn what has been going on around the world in terms of deployment, in terms of policy, technology development. And so firstly, we must really learn and not try and reinvent the wheel. I think for us, sustainability is something that is really, really important to get on top of, particularly the sustainability of forest biomass, because as I said earlier, New Zealand would be totally focused on utilising forestry biomass rather than other feedstocks. So we really need to get on top of that sustainability, and that's the environmental sustainability and the social sustainability and the social acceptance of bioenergy. We need to figure out how we can mobilize the material we have, because at the moment we leave a lot of residues in forests, and that's causing huge environmental problems. We've had major storm events in New Zealand that have flushed a lot of the forest trash out, and has ended up in farmland, on beaches in the marine environment, and that's something that's not good. So we need to figure out how we mobilise all that forest waste. And then we get on to sort of technology development and how we can develop technologies that's specific for New Zealand, but also invest in them, because we're in a place where we have a lot of great ideas and we were able to innovate to a certain point and get capital in it to a certain point, but then there's this huge valley of death, and we have to, or those companies have to move overseas, and we've seen just in the last few months 2 companies relocate out of New Zealand. They're both working in the anaerobic digestion space, and of course a few years ago Lanzatech, who were a New Zealand company, had to move out because they couldn't get the capabilities, they couldn't get the investment. So we have to address that, and that comes down to the economics and how much money we've got flowing through the country. And so those are the key things, I think, that as a country New Zealand have to consider, and I think New Zealand won't be the only country that will have to consider those sort of issues.
Thank you, Paul. So we move on to Christian.
Yeah, I would like to shortly start on where you stopped, and this is the issue of acceptability. In Europe, we had a major process of determining future energy policies at the European Union level. And during the time where these policy packages were all developed, we saw unprecedented campaigning against bioenergy, pretty much like you had it against the liquid biofuels 15 years ago. $1.2 billion were spent by US foundations to fund this campaigning. And I think what also our responsibility as bioenergy sector is to make policymakers aware that this is not only an issue of acceptability, but also an issue of campaigning, because campaigning is targeting the acceptability and it's influencing it in a very substantial way, and it has been influencing it with disinformation, literally wrong information, at a scale that I have never seen before, and that had serious impacts on bioenergy perspectives in the European diverse legislations that were finally then decided in the last year fundamentally. So we didn't forget about bioenergy. Bioenergy was actively undermined in this context, and that's another issue that we have to face, and that could also come up in certain other areas. I mean, it's not, nobody knows whether suddenly some concerns are rising about SAF, and it is attacked and pulled into the dirt, like it was with the solid biomass in the European context. Because at the end of the day, we're talking about energy markets, we're talking about a lot of money that is being lost by those that will not be able to continue to sell their fossil fuels, and they will do something about it. So that's unfortunately one aspect that we also have to take into account. Policies is not only rational, it's also an issue of information and of interest.
Thank you very much, Christian. I think this is a very important statement, and very important to be aware that the loudest voice might not be the voice of the most people, but just the loudest voice. We see that in many aspects. I also liked in your introduction that you were frank about the downsides of bioenergy, like traditional biomass use is rarely sustainable, and it's also very unhealthy for the people who are sitting in the smoke all day. And I think this is one of the strengths that we would have as IEA Bioenergy, trying to stick to the facts, trying to advance the science, trying to provide the unbiased information and speaking to the facts. And I think it is very important that we are recognized as this authoritative voice, and that we are heard, and that decision makers not only listen to the loud voices, but also look into the reports and listen to us as well. So thank you very much for that statement. And I hand over to Marlon for your take.
Well, I would like to summarize in a few brief, short comments. One of them is that we try here in Brazil to make everything transparent in these policies. So what you said is perfect for this. I think that transparency is the remedy for this situation. We need to think that we must provide society the cheapest and of course, within sustainability framework, the cheapest and sustainable reduction of carbon intensity in the energy sector as we can possibly think of. So we need to reduce grams of CO2 per megajoule in the cheapest and sustainable way, in the more sustainable way. And to do that, we need to consider the reality and the context of local production of biomass, of bioenergy. And this will provide society with a mechanism, and the proper mechanism to judge and to do the hierarchy in these solutions that we can think of in terms of bioenergy supply. So when we think of that, we have a different perspective to communicate to society. And in this sense, when you are able to use objective science to provide the calculations of sustainability using life cycle assessment in a transparent way, in an objective way, we can get rid of some type of discussion that won't ever have a solution or a consensus, because we will not be talking about objective, specific, and measurable aspects of these policies. So when we do that, I think we can do what we are doing here in Hanover B, which is risk management, when we are trying to consider and to assess the sustainability of bioenergy and biofuels here.
So let me just take a brief look into the room, whether there are questions from the audience. So I see 2 hands, 3 hands. So we will already have to choose. So let me just go for the first 2 hands that were raised, which is a gentleman back there in the middle and the lady in front of him. Rubens, sorry, I did not see your hand.
Okay.
So Rubens, please.
Well, just
sorry. If we want to keep the timing of the session, we need to be brief in questions and statements. If you think it's so interesting, I don't mind.
Okay, well, just a comment on the next what Christian mentioned. 4.5 billion of people in this world now are in developing countries, and there is a straight correlation between energy availability and the human index development. So most of the development are to be in this area with 4.5 billion people that is spent up to 50 to 60 times less energy than developing countries. So we have to be very efficient in the way that you are using the energy, and don't forget about the mix that we have to have in this sense to have a better developed world in all sense. If you allow me, Dina, I just would like to ask from the guy from China to have a very short statement of how the situation is in China. Some of the country is going very fast, and also maybe international trade of bioenergy should be a good point to make these things to happen. Fully, you'd like to?
Thank you, Rubens, for handing over. Fu Lili, please, from China. Can you introduce yourself, because...
Okay, I give a brief statement from China. I'm Fu Lili from China, working in Chinese Academy of Science. For China, we try the best to improve, to development sustainable, renewable energy, including bioenergy. So we have clear rules for bioenergy, including bioethanol, we have E10, we have E10 for ethanol. We have a B10 for biodiesel. We also have the strategy for SAF. So I think I just got information. The government will standardize the LC analysis to predict, to calculate CO2 emission for different product, different industry. So I'm very sure China will continue develop bioenergy in the near future for sustainable development. I agree a lot with a talk from Germany. Biomass, we use it smartly together with electricity, wind from renewable resources. So that's all.
Hello, my name is Keith Simons. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Futuria Fuels. The Brazilian colleagues in the room will know our sister company, Supergasbras. We deliver LPG. Here in Brazil, there's an 8.5 million tonne market, 130 million tonnes. We do about 1 million tonnes of delivery. As Christian said, cooking is essential. Now, of course, LPG can be made from renewable feedstocks. It can be a byproduct from the HVO Haver process. We've developed technologies to make it from ethanol, looking to develop that here. One of the challenges, though, is that the policies support sustainable aviation fuel from the same feedstocks. Other challenges that aren't really recognised is the LPG market's about 320 million tonnes, 220 million tonnes for energy. Aviation fuel, 250 million tonnes. So it is comparable. So I suppose my question is, why the focus on sustainable aviation fuel, especially if we're talking about inclusive energy?
Thank you for the statement. And the question?
Yeah, next question. I'm Patricia Thornley. I'm Director of the Supergen Bioenergy Hub and also a Centre for Doctoral Training in Negative Emission Technologies. And this is going to actually pick up on what Keith has just been saying as well. Climate change is a global problem. The atmosphere cares about the net emissions, and that's why we have a net zero target. Do the panel think that we lose the plot a bit when we cascade that down to saying that individual countries will be net zero or individual sectors will be net zero, and is part of the real problem here that we don't have policy levers that exist at the same scale as the problem, i.e. global and global regions, and that it all just gets a bit lost in those individual comparisons, because when we come down to it, we argue about whether that aircraft should be electric or should have SAF, and whether it should have been used for an alternative purpose, but actually it's the global perspective that matters.
Thank you again, Patricia, for a also very valid statement and question. So we turn to the panelists and see who wants to reply.
I'll reply to Patricia. You're right. Doing this by a country-by-country basis is suboptimal, definitely. But biomass is also regional, so we have to get the balance right here. And so for New Zealand, for instance, we're a reasonably small country, a long way away from anywhere. So we need to put our house in order first, I think. We're not going to export huge quantities of biofuels or biofuel feedstocks. The closest country is Australia. They've got all their own. Next closest will be Indonesia, and we see what's happening there. So I agree with the sentiment, but actually there's that local biomass production piece that we have to factor in.
Thank you. Daniela, please.
Yeah, just maybe to add, yes, it's a great and urgent target to realize net zero energy system and also beyond as far as possible. But I hope that also in here we clarify that it is not one way. So this is why it makes sense that different stakeholders also go for different solutions. And when I just remember when we started renewable energies in general, maybe 20 years ago, it was also a big added value that different countries try different pathways or policy regimes and whatever, and that also increases these options to learn. And I think, Paul made it quite clear there's a need to learn, and I think this is also helpful for many, many countries.
Thank you. Marlon.
Well, from what Patricia brought us, I think that we should never give up. We cannot give up. We must try and try and try, and I think that what G20 did here and the signals that came from the ministerial declaration is that let's try another approach. Let's put things in place and be calm a little bit and try to develop things from a different perspective. And I think that we must try. I think that we should try and never give up, because if the past strategies didn't work out and we are in this current situation, I think that we cannot be stuck in the past, and we must build things from now, what we have, and let's see what we can do. I think we have a very good approach in this G20 Energy Transition Working Group and the Ministerial Declaration, and I think that we should give it a try.
Thank you, Marlon. And finally, Christian.
Just a short reply to the gentleman who was talking about the renewable LPG. It's great to work on that, but just keep in mind that 70% of the energy that was originally in the biomass is being lost in the process to produce it. And that's what I meant when I was talking about prioritizing efficient solutions. If you use it directly and put a fire to it in a way that does not smoke, you don't lose these 70%.
If I can just also respond to the LPG question, absolutely, we should be looking at all technologies and all fuel vectors, but we need to consider at the same time what are the alternatives to LPG, what are the alternatives to aviation fuel, and in fact, do we have any? And maybe that's why SAF has taken priority, because at the moment, there are very little alternative to a liquid fuel carrier for aviation.
Thank you. I think we should try to start wrapping up. Mark, I'm handing back over to you.
Yes, I'd get you to join me in thanking the panel for what I think was a very productive conversation. And yeah, just picking up on the concept of performance-based and understanding the priorities, understanding it is a global problem. A lot of the levers and tools available to us are available at a national level, and then those are the levers and tools that we're trying to use. And really grab Paul's point is that we need to learn from each other. So while the national approach to a global problem is suboptimal and less than ideal, it does present the opportunity to try different things at those levels and learn from each other. And in a perfect scenario, we learn from each other and reach a point where we are approaching it globally, but people, politics, and things like that get in the way. So I might leave it there. Dean, if you have any concluding comments?
Thank you. Well, I agree to all these statements that you just picked out, and I think also it was very important to see that countries are at different stages, what Daniela said. So the national approach is what is my most urgent need that needs to be fulfilled, and go for that one. And that probably also helps a bit with the LPG question. Should we go for cooking fuel or should we go for aviation fuel? So in my country, in Austria, this is not a difficult question because we have electric cooking. But in a country where many people don't have access to clean cooking fuel, this question will be answered very differently. I would also like to thank everyone here, all the panelists, bringing this great diversity into the discussion. So that's for thanking, and we have some instructions to the audience that you're welcome for the coffee break outside. And please remember that there is another policy panel discussion after the coffee break in here. Thank you.